this is the tale of two interviews is how I'm going to call it. We're going to see drastically different sort of styles of interviewing RFK. You can clearly see one is not liking his candidacy versus one is okay with his candidacy. And I think I want to start with the CNN interview. The CNN interview is with Aaron Burnett. Now, of course, RBN is not a supporter of RFK. We consider him to be pretty despicable in the support of Israel. But he has good takes on the empire, and that's typically why a lot of his, that's usually where a lot of his support comes from, along with his stance on COVID. But let's listen to a little bit of what he says here on CNN, and this is RFK Jr. and it's actually a 35-minute clip. This is a pretty long interview and a pretty long clip. Like these news outlets don't rarely put out clips past, I would say 12 minutes is usually like the longest clip. This is a 35-minute clip they posted because it's important to them that they get out, because at the end of this clip, which we're not going to get to, is a panel, and it's a fact check guy who comes in and fact checks some of the stuff that RFK says in this interview. And then after that, there's a panel that comes in and they're freaking out. The black lady says something like, he is dangerous. And it's because of the things that we're going to be covering now. So I think that's a pretty good preface to start out with. Let's start with the video. Here, is this YouTube? Yeah, this is regular YouTube. Okay, so let's start with this video here.
Mr. Kennedy, I appreciate your time. So you're Jeff Zeleny going through the role that Jill Stein played when you just look at the vote tallies in the state of Wisconsin. Only need 2,000 votes to get on the ballot in the state of Wisconsin. So what do you say to Democrats who point to Jill Stein and say, that's going to be you?
Well, right now, I don't know what I'm going to do, who I pull more from in November. Right now, I'm pulling pretty much equally, probably a little more from President Trump. As you pointed out, I want to pull from both of them. But, do you want kind of a glib answer or a thoughtful answer?
I'd always prefer thoughtful.
Okay. I mean, what I would say is you have both sides using scare tactics. Republicans say that if Joe Biden gets in, it's going to be the end of the republic. Democrats say if Donald Trump gets in, it's going to be the end of democracy. And I don't think either of them are actually going to destroy democracy. We have institutions in this country that are pretty enduring. And if you look at both those candidates, they're very different in their temperament. They're very different in their ideology, and in their rhetoric. But on the issues where they actually depart from each other, it's a very narrow band of issues. And it's the culture war issues like abortion, guns, the border, and they're all important issues.
This here is an important point that he makes, that about the two parties. And this is where even though you don't like him as a candidate, you have to report on some of the good things that he says, because this is a good analysis that he makes here. And the two parties differ very narrowly from each other on culture war issues, and he named some of them, like abortion, like trans rights, like, banning books. These are culture war issues. These are these small, little, narrow issues that they're differ on. Broadly, they are the same. And this is where I believe in that panel at the end of the clip, when she says he's dangerous, this is what he's talking about. This analysis, this is essentially arguments against the lesser of two evil. And they keep saying lesser of two evil is a big thing. We need to be lesser of two evil. And he's saying it's a small sliver of things they disagree on. They largely agree on a bunch of things, which is an accurate assessment. So let's continue with JFK. Just wanted to stop and make that point.
But they're not existential issues. On the existential issues, neither of them has the capacity to address them. The biggest one being the debt. We now have $34 trillion in debt. The service on that debt is more than the our military spending. So, and within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar collected in taxes are going to go to servicing the debt. And who ran up that debt? It was President Trump and President Biden together in just 4 years each. They ran up more spending than all the previous presidents going back to George Washington combined. The chronic disease epidemic. When my uncle was president, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, 60% do. It's the biggest issue we have. $4.3 trillion that we're spending on that. And it's 4 times, almost 5 times our military budget. And it's getting worse and worse. You've never heard President Trump talk about it, never heard President Biden. The polarization in our country, again, existential. All of these issues, AI, and neither of them has the capacity to deal with these. And all of those issues are created by a system of corporate capture, this corrupt merger between.
So he's saying the two candidates don't have the capacity. That's his way of saying they are corporately bought. They are bribed. They're paid off. That's when he's saying they don't have the capacity to do it. That's the professional civil way to say the same thing. They don't have the capacity to do anything about these things that he listed. He listed things like AI, like the debt and other things that he would call corporate capture. And this is part of the things, one of the two big areas where people like RFK on. It's the medical freedom, and then also this assessment of the corporate capture of so many departments and what is it called? Institutions of the United States government. So let's listen to some more of RFK's interview.
Between state and corporate power that has absolutely subverted and undermined our democracy. And neither President Trump or President Biden has the capacity to address it because they're part of that system. They're both being financed by BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard, the military contractors, the pharmaceutical industries, and that system just spits out bad policies. And the illusion that if you differ on culture war issues, it means you're radically different. But the real.
That is such a great point. I remember I have it written down. I'm not even looking at my notes. The idea that because you differ on culture war issues that you're radically different is absurd. That's the analysis that RBN has been making and trying to ram through about this lesser of two evil stuff. The idea that these handful of issues that literally you notice never get resolved, these issues that never get resolved, you're just publicly identifying yourself socially with certain issues that never going to resolve, while the concrete things that can get resolved that we all agree on as workers, we're not uniting on because we're fighting on issues that's never going to be resolved. Essentially, I'm not going to the word never. That's why I said essentially. Never is kind of door shutting, but let's continue.
Real issue things that we need to do to save our country, they can't do them. And if you vote for President Trump or President Biden, they both had their chance. You're going to get more of the same. If somebody actually wants change, wants to actually alter those issues, they're going to vote for me.
And yet, to be president of the United States, if you have to be on the ballot in enough states to be able to win the Electoral College. You're not right now.
Yeah, and I will be.
You believe you will be? You believe, I mean, because I know
I will be. 100%. I'm going to be on the ballot in every state in the District of Columbia. Well, Eve, yes, and I've said this from the beginning, and we're already well on our way there. I think within 8 weeks, we're going to probably be on another 19 states. So we were not allowed to get.
So yes, and let him make the point, then I'll comment.
On the ballot before in most states because we didn't have a vice presidential candidate. You have to name a vice presidential candidate to get on the ballot in about 26 states. So now we have that.
So in about 26 states, about half the states, you need a presidential nominee vice presidential nominee already announced in order to get on ballots in those states. He just said we're going to add an additional 19 states, and I think he said, I'll rewind. I don't know. I don't think he said 8 days, but 8 days or 8 weeks or something like that. We're gonna be on the ballot in 19 more states. So he's gonna be on the ballot. The threshold is not that high in all states. I'll rewind it just a little bit to right there. So it's just in case he says it again.
Ballot before in most states, because we didn't have a vice presidential candidate. You have to name a vice presidential candidate to get on the ballot in about 26 states. So now we have that, and we have about 200,000 volunteers. It's gonna be easy for us to get on the ballot in every state.
So I know part of the reason that
In North Carolina, we had to get 13,000 signatures. We got 23,000. In New Hampshire, they said it would take us months to get our signatures. We got them in 1 day. In Utah, we got them in 1 week during a blizzard. So, we have a very, very good volunteer army out there.
So he has a pretty badass volunteer army, if you believe what he's saying. That's getting them on ballots in record times, if you believe what he's saying. I guess we're going to find out. We're going to see if that's true. In a couple of months, I guess, if we're seeing that he's more states is being added to his map, I guess so. But so far as getting on states, I find he's been trustworthy in that specific area. So I'll just leave it there. So let's listen more.
So when you talk about that, you had to have a VP candidate to get on in some of these states, right? So that's part of the reason I know you made this decision when you did. The person you've chosen is Nicole Shanahan. She's a lawyer. She doesn't have government experience. Obviously not a household name. And a lot of people have questioned why you picked her. Liz Smith of the DNC just today says she was picked for one reason and one reason only, the money. And obviously she speaks for the DNC, but Mick Mulvaney, who was OMB director under President Trump, said this.
There's one thing we need to know about her. It's the reason that Kennedy picked her for vice president. She's fabulously wealthy. This is the woman who single-handedly bankrolled his ad during the Super Bowl that cost $4 million. That's why he put her on the ticket, along with the fact.
I find this critique, even if it's true, to be totally hypocritical by these people. So your critique is that JFK is adding her because she has deep pockets, as Joe Biden just raised $26 million from donors? Like, is this serious? As Donald Trump and Joe Biden raised millions upon millions of dollars from donors, you have a problem with him teaming up with money. Isn't that rich? So he's teaming up with a former wife of a Google co-founder, but Joe Biden is teaming up with people like Comcast. That was one of their big donors. I think they wanted when they launched for this first term. That was one of the big donor events. That was the first one they did. They launched it with the Comcast guy. So it's very hypocritical. It shows that they can't self-reflect, but the audacity to make a point that he picked her because of money, as they just had a corrupt fundraiser that got protested where they raised $26 million. It is astonishing.
The fact that I think everybody else probably turned him down.
Would you have picked her if she didn't have the money?
Yeah. Did you see her speech?
Part of it. But I'm just asking, did you pick?
I don't think anybody who watched that speech would ever say that. She was impressive. She's eloquent. She's authentic. Her life is it's the template for the American dream. She started out as a minority kid in Oakland, extraordinary poverty, on food stamps, on welfare. She grew up and attended Stanford. Well, she became a Stanford fellow. She became an entrepreneur. She's a very, very uber successful businesswoman. She has encyclopedic knowledge of AI. She has an encyclopedic knowledge of chronic disease epidemic and how to stop it. She is young and she's a mother. And I wanted in my candidate, I want three things. One, somebody who was not an insider, because it was the insiders who created this problem. They created the debt crisis. They created the addictions war. They created the chronic disease epidemic. They created the polarization. I wanted somebody outside who's thinking outside of the box. Our campaign is for young people. We're the only campaign that is looking at this assault on our children, on what is happening to this young generation. So I wanted somebody who is young, who is not, an 80-year-old man. I wanted somebody who's a mother. I wanted somebody who's going to champion their issues. And I don't think anybody who looked at Nicole Shanahan's speech, which I urge people to do, would ever say that the reason that I picked her was for her money. By the way, we don't need her money to get on the ballot in every state. We already have the biggest field operation of any campaign. We are going to have no problem getting on the ballot in every state. We did not need Nicole Shanahan's money, and we're getting plenty of money. We're raising more money. Our campaign is, and President Trump or President Biden.
Well, so when you talk about, though, that you say that you're pulling equally from both, and we'll see what happens. But in the polling that we have, but hold on one second. I'm going to just take Georgia, because we all know okay. Georgia margin of victory.
Right. So here goes a classic tactic by corporate media where they want to pretend like an issue is larger than it really is. So they cherry pick information. So, of course, she cherry picks Georgia, the most likely state that went to Biden in 2020 that will return back to the Republicans, which is Georgia. So you go to Georgia, which has the Republican registration or voter registration outnumbers the Democrats. I don't have the exact number, but it's almost double. She wants to use Georgia as an example of how he pulls more from Biden than Donald Trump. So in Georgia, wouldn't it make sense that a red state, a Republican state, would have more solid support for the Republican presidential candidate in that state? But she wants to use it as to say, look, you pull more from him than from Joe Biden, then see, is that okay with you? But watch his answer. Maybe she didn't expect this to be his response.
Last time was 11,779 votes. So the latest polling from Georgia, you get 12% of the Democratic vote. You pull 5% of the Republican vote. Again, these are polls. This is where we are right now, but that's what they show. So when you look at it that way, how can you say that your campaign is not taking more from Biden?
What I would say to you, and I'm not. This isn't something I want to argue with you about. It's just my observation is, I don't care one way or the other.
I don't care one way or the other. Your Trump, he doesn't have Trump derangement syndrome. In the second interview that we discussed from Fox and Friends on Fox News, he talks more about how, and I think in this interview too, he said, I don't see either one of them as ending democracy. Our institutions are too strong for that, essentially, is what he said. Let's continue and finish out this one so we can get to the next
one. What my observation is of the Quinnipiac poll, the Harvard-Harris poll, the Gallup poll, the New York Times Siena poll, all the leading national polls at this point in history as of today show me polling like maybe 2 more points from President Trump than I am from President Biden. So mainly what they're showing, and the Politico did a big article on this, is my supporters are people who aren't going to vote at all. largely, and my donors are people who had given up on the American political process and are re-engaging because they feel that they don't want to choose between the lesser of two evils. They want to choose a candidate who is going to inspire them, who's going to give them hope, who has a vision for the future, and who has the vigor and energy to actually change this country. And that, those I want to engage those people in the political process. The Democrats and Republicans, I'm going to take from the margins. And I can't tell you, even today, it's irrelevant, Aaron, because it's really who am I going to take from in November?
So you, in 2000, Ralph Nader obviously was running, and you did an interview with NBC News just a few months before the election.
They think they're going to get him a gotcha right here. Watch this.
There's a political reality here, which is that his candidacy could draw enough votes in certain key states from Al Gore to give the entire election to George W. Bush.
And then you wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. You wrote, Ralph Nader is my friend and hero, but Mr. Nader's candidacy could siphon votes from Al Gore. Mr. Nader dismisses his spoiler role by arguing there is little distinction between the major party candidates and that Mr. Gore is compromised on too many issues. While I admire his high-minded ideals, his suggestion that there is no difference between Mr. Gore and Mr. Bush is irresponsible. A moment ago, you said you essentially see Trump and Biden as the same, different issues. But do you really believe that when people talk about the threat to democracy that Trump poses, do you really think that is an equal evil to Biden?
I mean, listen, I can make the argument that President Biden is a much worse threat to democracy. And the reason for that is President Biden is the first candidate in history, the first president in history that has used the federal agencies to censor political speech, so to censor his opponent. I can say that because I just won a case in the Federal Court of Appeals and now before the Supreme Court. It shows that he started censoring not just me. 37 hours after he took the oath of office, he was censoring me. No president in the country has ever done that. The greatest threat to democracy is not somebody who questions election returns, but a president of the United States who used the power of his office to force the social media companies, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, to open a portal and give access to that portal to the FBI, to the CIA, to the IRS, to CISA, to NIH, to censor his political critics. President Biden, for the first president in history, to use his power over the Secret Service to deny Secret Service protection to one of his political opponents for political reasons. He's weaponizing the federal agencies.
This is devastating. This is pretty devastating that he's bringing up, but he's referring to one of the things he's referring to is the Twitter files, when all of that information came out that the Biden administration is causing suppression. They're doing it now. They're still doing it. And that's what the Twitter ban bill is about. And I think RFK is actually for that ban, if I remember. Maybe I'm mixing it up. Don't quote me on that. But just to his point about Joe Biden, let's bring up a couple of headlines here. This one, is this USA Today? Too far, Biden. Federal judge rules Biden can't censor our social media feeds. Remember this story? Twitter files. When they lost, I think it's in front of the Supreme Court now, and the Supreme Court, of course, I think is going to overturn that. If I had to guess, I think that's what they're going to do. I think they're going to side and give it away. Biden administration blocked from working with social media firms about protected speech. It's another headline. So RFK Jr. is absolutely right. Now, President Trump is not the first president to question the validity of election results. That's not the first time. We just had it 20 years ago with Al Gore and Joe Biden. I'm sorry, Al Gore and George Bush. And then in even with Stacey Abrams' case, the gubernatorial race, the first one, she was talking about the stolen election herself. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Just wanted to show a couple of headlines to prove or to back up the point that RFK is making in this video. We'll get back to the video, but the points that he's making in the video, that uh, Joe Biden, no one else, no other president has ever done this. You're censoring the speech of your opponent, not granting Secret Service service to one of your opponents.
Are really critical threats
Donald
to
Trump, of
democracy.
course, tried to overturn a free and fair election. He tried to overturn one, right? He's still fighting in court.
Yes.
He said, how is that not a threat to democracy?
Well, I think that is a threat to democracy. If him trying to overthrow the election clearly is a threat to democracy. But the question was, who is a worse threat to democracy? And what I would say is, I'm not going to answer that question, but I can argue that President Biden is, because the First Amendment, Aaron, is the most important. Adams and Hamilton and Madison said, we put the guarantee of freedom of expression in the First Amendment because all of our other constitutional rights depend on it. If you ever got
So if you don't know what she's being given, she in her ear, she has an earpiece. It's on the side of her head that's not shown to the camera, and she's being fed retorts, replies to what he's saying. This is Fox and Friends interviewing RFK. It seems less adversarial. This interview that he has on Fox News is clearly less tension in the room with him speaking here. And again, this is with the idea that he pulls from Trump and Biden. And they still treat him a lot
let's
better.
Talk politics. A brand new Fox News poll finds that independent candidate RFK Jr.
Hang on a second. I wanted to preface it a little bit better. So this is the conservative side, or the conservative version of this tale of two interviews between CNN and Fox News. Let's listen.
All right, let's talk politics. A brand new Fox News poll finds that independent candidate RFK Jr. actually beats both Trump and Biden in favorability, as you can see the numbers right there. And their campaigns are reacting to the growing chance that he could actually change the course of the election of 2024.
That he has no path to victory. He is playing the role of spoiler candidate.
He's probably the most liberal person in the race, including the Green Party. I think he's probably going to hurt Biden. I don't see him hurting me.
So let's ask that man how he feels about those comments about him. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is here now. Congratulations. Great to see you.
Hang on a second. Why the framing is not? There we go. Okay. So I was trying to get that white bar off.
Congratulations on getting on North Carolina. And you've named Nicole Shanahan your running mate.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of these states require, don't they, Robert? They need you to name a running mate ahead of time for some reason.
There are 26 states where you can't start gathering signatures to get on the ballot without having a running mate first. So the announcement of Nicole as our running mate allows us now to get on those states, and we're going to move very, very quickly to get on all of them.
Mm-hmm.
We have a conservative base that every political party watches Fox, but a lot of conservatives like Fox. They like where you stand on vaccines, men playing in women's sports, immigration. What other conservative issues do you have that will appeal to?
So Fox News likes his stance on trans athletes in sports and immigration and something else. I'm sure they're going to like his answer on the debt, and that's what he's going to lead with. Let's see.
To those voters?
Well, I don't look at myself as liberal or conservative. I feel like I'm common sense on issues. I think the issues that are really existential in this country are issues that are important to both political parties. The national debt is $34 trillion now. We're now spending more on servicing that debt, paying off the interest, than we pay for the military. Within 5 years, 50 cents of every dollar collected in taxes is going to go to the debt. This is unsustainable. Within 10 years, it'll be 100%. Mm-hmm. President Trump and President Biden ran up that debt, the two of them, in just 4 years. ran up a higher debt than all the presidents in history back to George Washington combined. And so I don't think we're going to get a change. And this is really existential for our children. The chronic disease epidemic, which now is the biggest issue in this country. 60% of our people have chronic disease. When my uncle was president, it was 6%. Mm-hmm. The cost of diabetes, and when I was a kid, the typical pediatrician would see one case of diabetes in his lifetime. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who goes into his office is pre-diabetic or diabetic. And we are paying more to treat diabetes than the entire military budget. The cost of all these chronic diseases is $4.3 trillion. It's almost 5 times our military budget. It's more than any other country in the world. We are the sickest country in the world. Why is nobody ever talking about this? Why aren't our agencies telling us? Why has America got this problem and nobody else does?
Right. Well, Robert, one of the big issues for Democrats they've talked about is the threat to democracy. You raised some eyebrows yesterday when you were comparing the former president to the current president. You said in an interview that you believe that Joe Biden is a bigger threat to democracy than Donald Trump. This is what you have to say. Watch.
When people talk about the threat to democracy that Trump poses, do you really think that is an equal evil to Biden?
I mean, listen, I can make the argument that President Biden is a much worse threat to democracy.
Why did you say that?
And by the way, I said I can make that argument, and I think it's an argument that we ought to be having. President Biden has done something that no other president in history has done, which is to order media, particularly the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Google, to censor his political opponents. And I can say this because I just won a lawsuit in the Federal Court of Appeals now before the Supreme Court, because he began censoring me 37 hours after he took the oath of office, swearing to defend the Constitution. White House officials were on email with Facebook saying to them, you got to take down his posts. Facebook actually pushed back and saying there's no misinformation here. This is actually what he's saying is accurate. And they had to make up a new term called malinformation, which is information that is accurate but nonetheless inconvenient to, politically inconvenient. So there's been the First Amendment was put in the.
So he essentially, that's the spot where we're going to be stopping it. And the point in the 2 interviews is to illustrate the contentious nature between the 2 different interviews. One is pretty lax and one is letting him speak. One is not asking. I guess she let him speak. Let me not say it that way. The questions are different. They come from a different place. Her questions came from a place of you are going to be a spoiler and elect Trump. And their questions are coming from a place where they're just trying to learn about him. Because in the second half of this interview, they actually go after him about his VP pick, because to them, that's a liberal. They don't view her the same way they view him. They view her as a staunch Democrat, as a Democrat donor for years, as a, that's how they view her. And they go after him later on in this video. And I mean, it looks nowhere near what it looked like on CNN, but I guess going after him in their way, at least pushing back, at least saying the words that a lot of conservatives raise their eyebrow when you picked her because they see her as a liberal. They essentially say it to his face. And then, he goes ahead and rebuts that the best that he can, but, it is what it is. Kellyanne Conway on the show. This interview goes over a couple of good things. I do want to cover it. It's also about 7 minutes or so. All right, so let's go. This is Faulkner Focus.
Campaign and running for office as an independent is going to lead to Trump's election. I love my brother. and it pains me to come out against him. But I am very concerned with the stakes in this election. And I'm very concerned from the polls that I'm seeing that he takes many more votes from Biden than he does from Trump.
That is RFK Jr.'s sister on why she is not supporting her brother's White House bid. Her comments are highlighting Democrats' big fears that the independent candidate is a real threat to President Biden's reelection. That worry is likely to grow as his campaign says it now has enough signatures to get on North Carolina's ballot. This is the 5th state where he has reached that threshold. One headline has it this way: Biden's nightmare scenario for key battleground state is one step closer to reality. The Biden camp and the DNC have reportedly put together a team to try to block RFK Jr.'s ballot access. And
That sounds like some
he explained
democracy.
it this morning why he thinks Biden actually is a bigger threat to democracy than Donald Trump. Watch.
President Biden has done something that no other president in history has done, which is to order media to censor his political opponents. What President Trump said about, about questioning the election, of course, that's a threat to democracy, but it is not the worst threat, undermining the First Amendment of our Constitution and then weaponizing the federal agencies to get his opponents off the ballot.
The latest Fox News poll, take a look at it for yourself, finds RFK Jr. gets 12% of the national vote in a 5-way race. That includes Cornel West and Jill Stein. So you can combine those and figure out where they go, because RFK Jr. is really the deepest competitor that you're looking at on the screen right there for the last 3. Kellyanne Conway, Fox News contributor, KA Consulting president, and former senior advisor to President Trump. All right. You sat down and immediately during the commercial said to me, I can't believe a relative of RFK Jr. is seeing something, and she's so much younger than Biden, seeing something and voting for Biden. What did you mean?
Yes. Well, I'm sure it pains people to go against their own brother for president, but she's actually supporting Biden, and the reason she gave was Trump. So put all that together. It's quite the salacious triangle. But I think the resurgence and the likely reelection of Donald Trump, Harris, has made otherwise reasonable, intelligent people crazy. And they say things I know they can't possibly believe. They let the lies fly constantly, because they literally can't deal with another term of Donald Trump. It's like, oh, what will we do with lower taxes and fewer regulations and energy independence?
Now, she's being sarcastic here, but her analysis that they just can't fathom another Donald Trump presidency, that is true. There's people that's pulling their hair out, having heart attacks. People like George Takei, or however you say his name. People like Alyssa Milano. People like Deborah Messing. People like Molly Joan Fott. I think that's how you say her name. This new reporter with the red hair streak in her hair that's red and black glasses. Those are the type of people. Jennifer Rubin, that's another one that's going to be pulling their hair out. All of the people at the Lincoln Project will be doing all of what she's saying here. All right, so let's get back to Kellyanne Conway. We're going to rewind 15 seconds.
Reasonable, intelligent people crazy. And they say things I know they can't possibly believe. They let the lies fly constantly, because they literally can't deal with another term of Donald Trump. It's like, oh, what will we do with lower taxes and fewer regulations and energy independence and no new wars, a secure border, all these things that Donald Trump will bring back. But I think that RFK Jr.'s statements were incredibly insightful and important. The reason he's catching on is not just because of young people or libertarians. It's because the Democratic Party ejected him. He was running in the primary as a Democrat against Joe Biden. And the DNC chair stood up and said there will be no debates. They really tried to silence and censor him. And so he said, okay, I'll take my campaign.
So interesting.
And I'll go run as an independent. And what has it done? It has taken votes away from Joe Biden. How do we know? If you look at the Fox News poll that you just showed, in a 5-way race.
So let's discuss this part that she's saying, because is this an issue, RFK that is, in his third-party candidacy, is this an issue that was created by the Democratic Party if they would have just allowed a primary? So because you said, hey, we're gonna, we're gonna rule with an iron fist, the Democrat adjacent guy known as RFK Jr., he's a quote unquote an independent now. He runs as an independent, and now he's going to be on the ballot in November in all 50 states against you. Wouldn't you think, as a strategy, it would have been a better strategy to try to take him out from Joe Biden's point of view in the primaries? Wouldn't that seem like a better strategy instead of crushing his ability to run a campaign, a full campaign, or fully participate? That's a better way of saying it. And now he chooses a different route. Now you have a problem with that. So great point that by Kelly right here.
Nationally and in all 6 swing states. 5-way race: Cornel West, Jill Stein, RFK Jr., Donald Trump, Joe Biden. Trump increases his lead over Biden in all 6 swing states and nationally when you have a 5-way race. So far, these third-party candidates are not taken away from Donald Trump. And may I just say, the so-called no labels that in January said we have 7 weeks and 14 candidates, they're out of time. They got a lot of money, they're out of time, and they have no candidate. So they were trying to stop Trump. I hope some of them will come over and support Trump.
When you say that the Democratic Party ejected RFK Jr., it's really phenomenal what has happened, because they had to have seen that a Kennedy, and I said this from the very beginning, a Kennedy would carry some portion of the party just out of curiosity for people on the left. And now it's more than that, because immigration is number one. I mean, Biden has united everybody in the country against his border policy. So he's done that unification. Let's get to this. Former Clinton strategist James Carville was talking about Biden's youth voter problem. Watch.
I've been very vocal about this. It's horrifying.
This guy.
Our numbers among younger
This is the
voters.
granny from Beverly Hillbillies.
Particularly younger blacks, younger Latinos. We're not shedding them. They're leaving in the droves.
It's almost like what you said. Ejection. Younger voters were key to Biden's coalition in 2020. A Pew Research Center analysis finds 59% of voters aged 18 to 29 voted for him in 2020 presidential election, compared to Trump's 33%. A poll from...
I'm going to pause it here because I want to look at these numbers. So 2020, Joe Biden had 59% of young voters, and Donald Trump had 33%. Look at the gain that Donald Trump has. Look at the decline that Joe Biden has. Joe Biden declined 7 points, and Donald Trump goes up 15 points. That is a 22-point swing. 22-point swing, but for young voters, wouldn't you say that's telling of the Israeli-Hamas war? And I'm sure some other things, broken promises on the student debt and other areas, but that's pretty devastating. If you're not winning young voters as a Democrat, you're not winning, bro. Young voters and black voters, you have got to win those in high numbers, not just the majority. You got to win those in high numbers in order to win, because you haven't won the white vote in I don't even know how many election cycles. But let's continue.
From February shows Biden with the support of 52% of 18 to 34-year-old voters, while Trump received support from 48%. That's a jump of 15 points for Trump. Why?
Well, it's a couple things, and it shouldn't just be looked upon as Joe Biden's age, lack of agility, ability, and acuity, Harris. It's really his policies. If you're a young couple or even a young single person in your mid-20s, early 30s, what does Joe Biden offer you? Canceling student debt, which the Supreme Court said you can't do from the executive branch anyway.
But he did it anyway.
He did it anyway. He doesn't care. But honestly, when will you afford your first home? When will you get out of debt? What's in it for you? We've got this national debt. People are afraid to have children now. They're saying, I want to be a parent, but I can't afford anybody else on my payroll at home. In other words, I'm trying to support myself. And the other thing is they've done nothing but take for granted all these core Democratic constituencies, union households, women, Hispanics, African Americans, young people. Everybody I just mentioned to you, Donald Trump doesn't need to get a majority of any of them, and he
No.
can still win in a monster reelection. He doesn't need to get.
That's the issue that Joe Biden has. Donald Trump does not have to get a majority. Donald Trump doesn't have to get great numbers. Donald Trump just has to do marginally better than any other Republican has. That's it. That's it. Like I said, is the reason I called this stream or made the graphic the way that I made it. After looking at all of this video content and these articles, I was like, there's nothing else I could put on this graphic but Trump will beat Biden. There's nothing else I could put on there because this is all, it's all culminating. It's all like a perfect storm against Joe Biden. So unless something drastically drops out of the sky in favor of Joe Biden, I don't know what this guy is going to do.